The American Frontier: Pioneers, Settlers, and the Wild West, written by Harry Montgomery, narrated by Cedar Reyes. Chapter 1: The Early Explorers. The early explorers set in motion a journey of discovery that would shape the destiny of a continent. Venturing into unknown lands with limited maps and few resources, these daring adventurers sought not only new trade routes and wealth, but also the promise of uncharted territories. Their voyages were driven by curiosity, ambition, and in many cases, the desire to escape circumstances at home. With each step into unfamiliar territory, these pioneers faced challenges that tested their resilience and determination. Navigating vast rivers, towering mountain ranges, and endless stretches of dense forests, they pursued dreams that often ended in triumph as well as tragedy. From the first accidental landfalls to the more deliberate exploratory expeditions, the stories of these early voyagers are filled with both brilliance and hardship. Many of the explorers were motivated by the promise of establishing new trade connections and expanding their nation's borders. They set out with scientific instruments and compasses in hand, determined to chart the unknown. The natural phenomena they encountered, such as unusual weather patterns, peculiar rock formations, and unique animal species, sparked intense curiosity and led to detailed observations that formed the basis of early scientific inquiry in the New World. Their reports, albeit sometimes exaggerated, captured the imagination of those back home and often inspired further expeditions. Encounters with the indigenous populations were a significant aspect of the early exploration period. While some interactions led to mutual exchange and cultural enrichment, others resulted in tension and conflict. The early explorers relied on guides from native tribes whose deep knowledge of the land provided invaluable assistance. In many instances, these native allies introduced new agricultural practices and survival techniques that enabled the explorers to adapt to the harsh wilderness. Despite these moments of cooperation, the cultural misunderstandings and competition over resources frequently undermined peaceful relations and left a lasting impact on the native peoples. Technological advancements, though limited by modern standards, played a crucial role in these expeditions. Navigational tools, though rudimentary, allowed explorers to venture farther and more confidently into unknown regions. The craftsmanship of shipbuilders and instrument makers was vital in ensuring that these daring men and women could rely on their equipment. Their writings and maps, often created under extreme conditions, would later become essential resources for future explorers and settlers. The success of these early journeys was not merely a matter of luck, but a testament to human ingenuity and persistence. As these explorers documented the landscapes they encountered, they set the stage for the monumental changes that would follow. The accounts of sweeping vistas, bizarre flora, and untamed wilderness sparked dreams and aspirations among those who followed. The legacy of the early explorers is a mixed tapestry of exploration, conquest, cultural exchange, and at times tragedy. Their courage and determination contributed significantly to the formation of a new national narrative, one that celebrated adventure and the relentless pursuit of knowledge in the face of the unknown. This chapter lays the groundwork for understanding how these first steps into an uncharted world would eventually lead to the transformation of entire societies and the birth of a nation. The first European contacts. The initial encounters between European explorers and the indigenous peoples of the Americas marked a period of significant transformation and challenge. Driven by a mix of curiosity, ambition, and the thirst for new trade opportunities, the Europeans embarked on daring voyages that ultimately led them to lands previously unknown to their cultures. They arrived with a combination of determination and the baggage of their own societies, bringing with them technologies, customs, and aspirations that would forever change the course of history. These encounters, though marked by moments of fascinating cultural exchange, also set in motion events that would lead to profound consequences for native populations. At the outset, the Europeans often viewed their discoveries through a lens of potential wealth and territorial expansion. Navigation by the stars, rudimentary compasses, and evolving cartography allowed these explorers to traverse immense distances and document lands that had never before been recorded in European literature. Their narratives, filled with both excitement and bewilderment, detailed unknown flora and fauna, vast rivers, and lush, expansive landscapes. While these accounts piqued the interest of European courts and merchants alike, they also obscured the complexity of the indigenous cultures encountered. The settlers were not merely wanderers exploring empty lands. They came into contact with well-established civilizations that had their own elaborate systems of governance, trade, and social structure. The interactions that followed were diverse. Some meetings were grounded in mutual curiosity, where both sides exchanged knowledge about the environment, agriculture, and survival techniques. Native guides played an instrumental role in assisting the Europeans to navigate unfamiliar terrain and avoid potential perils. These first encounters occasionally led to an exchange of ideas and practices, as indigenous peoples demonstrated advanced techniques in farming, medicine, and resource management. However, the potential for harmony was often overshadowed by the Europeans' underlying intentions of conquest and the exploitation of natural resources. Their desire to acquire riches sometimes led to misunderstandings and conflicts, as the natives, who had long nurtured their own ways of life, found themselves facing an entirely different worldview. The initial contacts were layered with complexity, as the Europeans brought with them not only new technologies and ideas, but also diseases that had devastating impacts on indigenous communities. The native populations, having no immunity to these foreign ailments, experienced significant loss and disruption to their traditional ways of life. This tragic aspect of the encounters underscored the unforeseen consequences of this cultural collision. Over time, the power dynamics between the Europeans and the native peoples shifted dramatically, setting the stage for future colonization and the restructuring of entire regions. The narrative of these contacts is marked by both instances of cooperation and episodes of conflict, with long-lasting repercussions that are still evident in modern cultural and social landscapes. Ultimately, the first contacts between Europeans and the native peoples of the Americas were a confluence of hope, ambition, and tragedy. These early interactions not only initiated the spread of knowledge across continents, but also paved the way for a period of deep cultural exchange and significant upheaval. The complex legacy of these meetings continues to provoke discussion and analysis, as historians seek to understand the full scope of their impact on the social and cultural evolution of the New World. Mapping the unknown territories. In the age of exploration, the drive to chart the landscapes of uncharted lands became a quest as much about discovery as it was about asserting influence. Mapping the unknown territories was an endeavor that combined scientific curiosity with a strategic impulse to document lands whose features had never before been recorded. Explorers, armed with nascent instruments and fueled by adventurous spirit, set out to understand and depict regions that spanned vast plains, intricate river networks, mountain ranges, and daunting deserts. The task was not only one of physical endurance, but also of intellectual rigor, as each journey presented opportunities to record geographical features that were previously hidden to the civilized world. The process of mapping these territories was complex, involving the careful measurement of distances, the identification of natural landmarks, and the assessment of climatic conditions that could affect travel. Basic tools such as compasses, astrolabes, and sextants became indispensable in determining directions and positions. Explorers and early cartographers combined their observations with the knowledge of indigenous peoples, who often knew the land intimately but whose insights were sometimes overlooked by the European visitors. The resulting maps were a blend of empirical observation and local lore, capturing both the physical and the mystical elements of the unknown landscapes. This early cartographic work, despite its inherent limitations and occasional inaccuracies, laid the groundwork for future explorations and colonization efforts. Maps that were produced during this period served not only as navigational aids for subsequent travelers, but also as symbols of power and territorial claims. They were valuable commodities that represented the ability to control and exploit the resources of an area, making mapping a strategic tool in the hands of expanding empires. Even when flawed, these early maps conveyed a sense of the vastness and diversity of the New World, sparking the imaginations of those who saw them and inspiring more ambitious exploratory missions. The challenges encountered during these endeavors were many: rugged terrain, unpredictable weather, and the sheer enormity of unexplored regions often conspired to frustrate the efforts of even the most determined explorers. In many instances, the perilous conditions led to incomplete or distorted representations of the geography. Still, each attempt to document the land added a piece to the puzzle, gradually revealing the outlines of a continent that was full of promise and potential. The ingenuity and persistence of these early mappers highlight a critical phase in the human desire to understand our surroundings, marking a shift from myth and speculation to systematic study and practical measurement. By translating their first-hand encounters into cartographic records, the early explorers established the foundation for a new era of navigation and territorial management. Their maps, though primitive by today's standards, were essential to guiding migrations, facilitating trade, and providing a visual narrative of discovery. The legacy of mapping the unknown territories endures in the detailed charts and modern satellite imagery that we now take for granted, a direct descendant of the bold efforts of those who first dared to venture into the wild and enigmatic landscapes of the world. The impact of exploration on native tribes. The arrival of explorers into new territories brought profound and multifaceted changes to native tribes, affecting their social structures, cultures, and traditional ways of life. As European explorers traversed vast lands in search of new opportunities, their encounters with indigenous peoples initiated a complex series of interactions that would alter the dynamics of native communities. These early meetings were often driven by curiosity and a desire for cultural exchange. However, the consequences of these interactions frequently led to unintended disruptions in the established order of native societies. One of the most immediate impacts was the introduction of foreign diseases that native populations had no immunity against. Epidemics swept through indigenous communities, dramatically reducing their numbers and undermining traditional leadership structures. With entire villages decimated, survivors found their cultural practices and oral traditions weakened, as elders and knowledge keepers were lost. This demographic collapse sometimes created a power vacuum that left native tribes vulnerable to further external pressures and exploitation, accelerating the decline of established social systems. In addition to the spread of diseases, exploration brought significant cultural shifts through the introduction of new technologies, trade goods, and religious ideas. Items such as metal tools, firearms, and textiles were exchanged for local resources, often transforming indigenous economies. While these goods sometimes improved daily life by easing labor-intensive tasks, their integration also led to a growing dependency on European materials. As native tribes increasingly engaged with the new trade networks, the influence of traditional practices waned, and a tension developed between embracing modern innovations and preserving ancestral customs. This tension was compounded by the arrival of missionaries, whose efforts to convert indigenous peoples to new faiths often disrupted established spiritual practices and community rituals. Explorers also played a critical role in redrawing territorial boundaries. Maps and accounts produced during these expeditions redefined regions in ways that did not always take native land rights and cultural boundaries into account. Such territorial reassignments were sometimes used as justification for subsequent colonization, creating conflicts over land and resources that persist in various forms to this day. As European powers laid claim to vast areas of land, native tribes found themselves relegated to smaller, less fertile areas, severely affecting their ability to maintain traditional subsistence practices. The resulting loss of land and autonomy had long-term ramifications for indigenous communities, altering their relationship with the natural environment and the resources upon which they depended. Despite these profound challenges, native tribes exhibited resilience and adaptability in the face of overwhelming change. They incorporated certain European goods and ideas into their own cultural frameworks, selectively embracing innovations while rejecting those that threatened their core values. In many instances, indigenous communities redefined their cultural identities to accommodate the new realities imposed by exploration and colonization, creating hybrid traditions that persist even today. Nonetheless, the overall impact of exploration was one of significant disruption, marking a turning point in the history of native tribes, a period that saw centuries of cultural transformation, conflict, and adaptation. The legacy of these early encounters is complex and layered. While there were moments of peaceful exchange and mutual learning, the overarching narrative reflects the deep and lasting impact of exploration on native tribes. This era of contact set in motion a series of historical processes that reshaped not only the lives of indigenous communities, but also the broader course of history, leaving an indelible imprint on the cultural landscape of entire regions. Chapter 2: The Westward Expansion. The westward expansion represents a transformative era in American history, marked by the gradual and relentless movement of settlers across vast and untamed landscapes. This period emerged from a confluence of economic opportunity, ideological motivation, and the enduring belief in manifest destiny, the idea that the United States was destined to expand its territory across North America. Driven by a desire for land, freedom, and a fresh start, thousands of families and individuals embarked on arduous journeys that altered the nation's geography and social fabric. Traveling by wagon train, on horseback, or even on foot, settlers encountered rugged terrains, unpredictable weather, and the ever-present challenge of navigating the unknown. The journey itself became a trial by fire, wherein people learned to cope with the physical hardships of the trail, the scarcity of food and water, and the ever-looming threat of disease. Yet amid these challenges, the promise of prosperity and a better life outweighed the risks. New settlements emerged along major routes, acting as beacons of civilization in an expansive wilderness that, until then, had remained largely untouched by organized farming or sustained human habitation. Economic opportunities, such as the lure of fertile farmland, abundant natural resources, and burgeoning mining prospects, spurred a mass migration westward. This great movement also led to the development of infrastructure, with the establishment of roads, telegraph lines, and eventually railroads that connected the remote frontier with established eastern cities. The building of these transportation arteries not only facilitated the flow of settlers and goods, but also symbolized the transformative power of innovation and determination in shaping the national landscape. With the steady progress of the railroads, isolated communities gradually turned into thriving towns and cities, as commerce and communication bridged the distance between the old and new parts of the nation. Westward expansion was accompanied by significant cultural change. The influx of diverse groups, including immigrants from Europe and long-established native communities, created a melting pot of traditions and experiences. Many settlers brought with them not only their skills and labor, but also their cultural heritage, which mingled with local practices to give rise to new social norms. However, This blend was not without its tensions. The continuous push into new territories often led to conflicts over land and resources, pitting incoming settlers against indigenous populations who had long called the plains and mountains home. These clashes and negotiations over land rights underscored the complex interplay between progress and preservation, as the expansion inevitably led to the displacement and marginalization of Native peoples. The legacy of the westward expansion is one of both triumph and tragedy. The bold spirit of the pioneers, whose courage and resourcefulness carved out new communities amid stark landscapes, continues to be celebrated in American folklore and literature. At the same time, the expansion highlighted the profound costs that come with rapid transformation, including environmental degradation and cultural loss. Ultimately, the westward expansion reshaped the political, economic, and cultural contours of the nation, laying the groundwork for the modern United States and leaving an enduring imprint on its collective identity. The Louisiana Purchase and its aftermath. The Louisiana Purchase stands as one of the most pivotal moments in American history, marking a dramatic expansion of national territory and setting in motion a series of transformative events. In 1803, the United States acquired approximately 828,000 square miles of land from France, an agreement that doubled the size of the young nation and opened vast tracts of land to future settlement. This acquisition was driven by a combination of diplomatic ingenuity and strategic necessity. Faced with the challenges of European conflicts and shifting global alliances, President Thomas Jefferson seized the opportunity to secure American interests by negotiating a deal that would not only strengthen the nation's borders, but also shape its destiny. The purchase was met with both enthusiasm and skepticism among the American populace. Many supporters hailed it as a great opportunity to expand the nation's reach, believing that the new lands would provide ample resources and space for growing populations. Farmers, traders, and prospectors envisioned a future of prosperity as fertile soil and abundant natural resources promised to fuel economic growth. At the same time, doubts were raised over the constitutional authority of the federal government to acquire such expansive territories. Despite these legal and political debates, the purchase was completed, and the newly acquired territories became a canvas for American expansion. In the years following the purchase, the United States faced the immense task of integrating this vast region into the national framework. Explorations led by figures such as Lewis and Clark became critical in mapping the unknown territories, establishing American presence, and fostering relationships with Native peoples who had long inhabited the land. Their expedition not only provided valuable geographical and scientific knowledge, but also played a key role in reinforcing the idea of manifest destiny, the belief that the United States was destined to expand across the continent. This period of exploration was marked by both adventure and hardship, as pioneers navigated treacherous landscapes, unpredictable weather, and encounters with indigenous tribes whose ways of life were deeply connected to the land. The aftermath of the Louisiana Purchase was a time of rapid transformation. Settlements began to sprout along riverbanks and in fertile valleys, laying the foundations for future states. The new territory soon saw the construction of roads, the establishment of trade routes, and the development of agricultural enterprises that were vital to the nation's economy. However, this era of expansion was not without its challenges. The influx of settlers led to conflicts with Native American tribes, whose ancestral lands were increasingly encroached upon by a growing population. These tensions often resulted in violent confrontations, forcing the government to confront the difficult realities of managing a diverse and expanding nation. Economic benefits were accompanied by significant social and political changes. As more people migrated to the new territories, cultural exchanges occurred, blending established traditions with emerging American ideals. The federal government also faced the task of constructing a system of governance that could integrate these remote regions into the broader national narrative. The legacy of the Louisiana Purchase is thus multifaceted. It is remembered as an act of visionary expansion that provided the foundation for economic opportunity and national growth, while also highlighting the inherent challenges of integrating diverse peoples and managing the complexities of an expanding frontier. The Oregon Trail and Migration. The story of the Oregon Trail and the subsequent migration to the West is one of determination, adventure, and profound change that reshaped the landscape of America. Beginning in the early 19th century, this great overland route became the artery through which thousands of settlers, prospectors, and pioneers journeyed in search of fertile lands, economic opportunity, and a fresh start away from the crowded conditions of the eastern states. The trek, which spanned more than 2,000 miles of challenging terrain, was a formidable test of endurance for those brave enough to traverse rivers, mountains, and vast prairies in often harsh and unpredictable weather conditions. Migrants on the Oregon Trail faced numerous hardships that tested their resilience in every possible way. They traveled in long wagon trains, moving as tightly knit groups that depended on one another for survival in the vast and untamed wilderness. Along the way, families encountered raging rivers that required inventive solutions to cross, steep inclines that demanded physical strength, and unpredictable weather that could change without warning. The journey was not only physically demanding, but it also placed considerable strain on the emotional and psychological well-being of the pioneers. Despite these challenges, the promise of a new beginning proved to be a compelling motivator for many, encouraging them to push forward with unwavering determination. The migration along the Oregon Trail spurred significant changes in American society. It accelerated the movement of populations westward at a time when the nation was rapidly expanding, setting the stage for the development of new communities, trade routes, and eventually the establishment of state boundaries. As settlers arrived in the fertile lands of Oregon and California, they introduced new agricultural practices, built small towns, and initiated local governance structures that laid the groundwork for future economic and social development in the region. The collective efforts of these pioneers contributed significantly to the concept of manifest destiny, reinforcing the belief that the American spirit was inexorably linked with the conquest of and settlement in new territories. However, the migration along the Oregon Trail was not without its costs and controversies. As settlers arrived en masse, they inevitably encroached upon territories that had long been home to indigenous peoples. This influx led to conflicts over land and resources, significantly disrupting traditional ways of life for Native communities. The relentless pressure from incoming settlers resulted in profound social and cultural changes, with the impact of these interactions still evident in various ways today. The trail thus became a symbol not only of American ambition and progress, but also of the difficult and often painful process of expansion that came with a price for many who already inhabited the land. The legacy of the Oregon Trail and migration is enduring, representing an important chapter in the nation's history. It reflects a time when hope, hardship, and human perseverance converged on the open frontier. The experiences of those who traveled the trail continue to inspire stories of courage and resilience, reminding future generations of the relentless quest for a better life in the face of adversity. The Oregon Trail remains an emblem of American expansion, a vivid reminder of the challenges and triumphs that have helped shape the country. Manifest Destiny and its influence. Manifest destiny emerged in the mid-19th century as an ideology that encapsulated the belief that the United States was destined to expand across the North American continent. This powerful concept not only justified territorial acquisition, but also framed a national identity that was intrinsically linked to the perceived superiority of American culture and institutions. Proponents of Manifest Destiny argued that it was both the duty and the destiny of the nation to spread its democratic and capitalist ideals, bringing progress and civilization to lands deemed underdeveloped. This belief system had far-reaching consequences, shaping political policies, spurring migration, and influencing the expansion of American influence throughout the West. At its core, Manifest Destiny was fueled by a blend of patriotism, economic ambition, and a sense of cultural mission. The idea resonated deeply with a nation in the midst of rapid expansion, as settlers and political leaders alike saw the vast, untamed American frontier as a canvas upon which they could build a new order. This expansion was portrayed as a benevolent force, one that would uplift indigenous populations by introducing them to the benefits of modern agriculture, education, and governance. The rhetoric of Manifest Destiny helped to galvanize public sentiment in favor of westward expansion, as the vision of a continental nation instilled a profound sense of purpose and direction. The influence of Manifest Destiny extended into the political arena, where it became a justification for policies that aimed to secure new territories. The annexation of Texas, the Oregon Treaty, and the Mexican-American War were all influenced by this ideology. These actions were seen as necessary steps in a larger, divinely sanctioned mission, even as they sparked controversies and conflicts. While some viewed the expansion as a natural progression towards progress and enlightenment, others criticized it as an aggressive form of imperialism that disregarded the rights and lives of indigenous peoples. The tension between these perspectives underscored the complexities inherent in Manifest Destiny's legacy. Economically, the belief in Manifest Destiny spurred a significant migration westward. Settlers leaving the established eastern states ventured into unknown territories, attracted by the promise of land, opportunity, and prosperity. This mass movement of people contributed to the development of new communities and stimulated the growth of trade and industry. Although the expansion bolstered economic growth, it was not without cost. The rapid spread of settlement disrupted traditional ways of life, leading to the displacement of Native American tribes whose lands were encroached upon by relentless expansion. This displacement laid the groundwork for long-lasting cultural and socio-economic challenges. Culturally, Manifest Destiny helped forge a national narrative centered on progress and optimism. It celebrated the pioneering spirit, valorizing the struggles of settlers as emblematic of a larger, almost mythic national endeavor. The idea promoted a unifying vision that transcended regional differences and created a collective identity grounded in expansion and innovation. However, this same narrative often glossed over the darker aspects of expansion, including the exploitation and marginalization of those who stood in the way of progress. The duality of Manifest Destiny is evident in how it was celebrated as a moral imperative, yet it also brought about significant human suffering and environmental disruption. In summary, Manifest Destiny was a multifaceted ideology that deeply influenced the course of American history. It provided a framework for expansion, motivated settlers to traverse dangerous frontiers, and justified political decisions that reshaped the continent. Although its legacy is mixed, the impact of Manifest Destiny remains a defining chapter in the American story, forever altering the nation's trajectory and the lives of those it touched. Chapter 3: The Pioneer's Journey. The story of the pioneer's journey is one filled with hardship, determination, and the relentless pursuit of a new life. Early Americans ventured into vast, uncharted territories with little more than hope, grit, and the belief that a better future awaited them. Driven by promises of land, opportunity, and the freedom to shape their own destiny, these intrepid families and individuals left behind familiar comforts to brave the unknown. Their journey was not a single event, but a series of arduous expeditions that spanned months and even years as they followed winding trails across rugged landscapes. Traveling in large groups along well-worn trails, the pioneers relied on each other for survival. Despite the harsh conditions, they maintained an unwavering resolve as they faced inclement weather, treacherous river crossings, and unforgiving terrain. The journey demanded not only physical endurance, but also a mental fortitude that could withstand the isolation and constant challenges of the wilderness. With every step, pioneers had to remain alert to the dangers of wild animals, disease, and conflicts with native tribes whose lands had been disrupted by this massive migration. Yet, throughout these trials, the sense of purpose and the hope for prosperity motivated them to press forward. The pioneers' journey was marked by moments of unexpected kindness and community spirit. Campsites along the way often became temporary hubs where settlers exchanged advice, resources, and news from distant parts of the country. These encounters fostered a sense of unity and collective struggle among people from diverse backgrounds who shared a common goal. Even in the face of depletion of supplies and waning morale, the determination to reach a place where they could build a new home provided a continuous source of strength. This collective spirit was instrumental in overcoming the countless obstacles that lay between the settlers and their new lives. Technology and innovation, although rudimentary by today's standards, played a significant role in easing the pioneers' burden. Basic tools, hand-drawn maps, and the simple design of wagons helped in navigating the unpredictable landscape and in transporting essential provisions. Over time, improvements in these areas led to better travel methods and more efficient routes, gradually reducing the risks involved in the journey. The pioneers, while primarily driven by need, also became inadvertent innovators, adapting techniques and sharing knowledge that would later influence the way America expanded westward. The legacy of the pioneers' journey is woven into the fabric of modern American society. Their experiences represent the triumph of the human spirit in the face of adversity and the willingness to take risks for the promise of a better future. The pioneer movement not only led to the establishment of new communities and agricultural practices, but also reshaped the nation's cultural and social landscape. Their arduous trek across vast distances continues to be remembered as a powerful chapter in American history, emblematic of determination, hope, and the transformative power of the human will. In looking back at their journey, one cannot help but admire the courage that drove them into the unknown in pursuit of the opportunity to forge a new path in a promising frontier. The hardships of crossing the plains. Traveling across the vast and unforgiving plains was a formidable challenge that tested the limits of physical endurance, mental fortitude, and human resolve. The pioneers who undertook this arduous journey were met with a landscape that offered little comfort or respite. Endless stretches of flat, open land provided no natural cover from the harsh weather conditions that frequently shifted from scorching heat during the day to bitter cold at night. These extreme temperature fluctuations made everyday survival a struggle, forcing travelers to adapt quickly or face the risk of exhaustion and illness. The journey was further complicated by the constant threat of deteriorating supplies and unreliable resources. Wagon trains, often drawn by oxen or horses, were laden with limited food, water, and essential tools. As the days turned into weeks, the depletion of these resources became a critical concern. The scarcity of water along certain stretches of the plains meant that even a short detour could turn into a desperate search for a life-sustaining creek or river. Moreover, unpredictable weather patterns brought sudden storms that could wash away precious supplies, damage wagons, and leave vulnerable travelers stranded in the open. Navigating the open terrain of the plains was another daunting aspect of the journey. With little in the way of natural landmarks, pioneers relied on crude maps and the memory of previous travelers to guide their way. This uncertainty often led to long, drawn-out detours that further drained supplies and increased the risk of becoming lost. The monotony of the unchanging landscape was not only physically taxing, but also mentally exhausting. The isolation and vast emptiness of the plains contributed to a growing sense of desolation, which in turn affected morale and the will to push forward. The physical demands of the journey were compounded by the ever-present risk of disease and injury. The close quarters of wagon trains, coupled with harsh living conditions, made outbreaks of illnesses such as dysentery and typhoid fever common. A minor injury could quickly escalate into a life-threatening situation when proper medical care was out of reach, often forcing entire groups to slow down or halt their progress. Even more perilous were encounters with wildlife and the constant fear of attacks from bandits, who saw the vulnerable pioneers as easy targets. Each of these dangers required not only physical strength, but also the mental resilience to overcome setbacks that threatened to end the journey prematurely. Despite these relentless challenges, the pioneers pressed onward, driven by the promise of a better life on the frontier. Their ability to persevere in the face of overwhelming adversity is a testament to the human spirit's capacity for endurance and hope. The hardships of crossing the plains were not merely obstacles to be overcome. They were crucibles in which the character and determination of each traveler were forged. In their struggle against nature and circumstance, these early pioneers laid the foundations of communities that would eventually become the backbone of a growing nation. Their story serves as a powerful reminder of the sacrifices made in the pursuit of opportunity and the relentless drive to explore new horizons. Wagon trains and the role of women. In the vast expanses of the American frontier, wagon trains were not simply modes of transportation, but vital lifelines that connected distant settlements. The journey west was a daunting challenge, and amid the relentless struggle to traverse perilous terrain and unpredictable weather, women played a crucial and multifaceted role in ensuring the survival and success of these itinerant communities. Their contributions extended far beyond the domestic sphere and were essential to the smooth functioning of the wagon train. Women endured the same hardships as their male counterparts, facing the perils of long, arduous journeys while also maintaining the household and emotional stability of their families. The physical strain of life on the frontier was intense, and women were not spared from the rigors of daily life. They helped load and unload supplies, cared for the sick and injured, and ensured that children received instruction and comfort in the midst of constant uncertainty. Their responsibilities sometimes extended to managing the finances of the group and organizing communal efforts to ration food, water, and other scarce resources, which in turn helped maintain morale during trying times. Beyond the practical tasks, women provided indispensable emotional support and resilience. The isolation of the open plains, the constant threat of attack or misfortune, and the inherent dangers of an uncharted wilderness made the journey as much a psychological ordeal as a physical one. Women, with their nurturing nature and steady presence, offered comfort and reassurance, becoming the linchpins of mental fortitude for families and the larger community. Their strength under pressure helped to alleviate the hardships faced by all, softening the harsh realities of life on the trail with acts of kindness and unwavering determination. Women also played a significant role in preserving cultural and social traditions in the midst of isolation. They organized small gatherings, improvised schools, and religious services wherever possible, ensuring that the family unit retained a sense of structure and identity, despite the instability of their circumstances. In many cases, the efforts to create a semblance of normalcy and continuity were critical in forging a community that could withstand the adversities of frontier life. Their influence was not merely domestic, but also instrumental in shaping the social fabric of emerging settlements. As the wagon train progressed and communities took root, the legacy of these women was evident in the establishment of schools, churches, and local government structures that would later become central to the evolving American society. Furthermore, the role of women in wagon trains challenged contemporary notions of gender and capability. Their active participation in tasks traditionally assigned to men demonstrated that resilience, resourcefulness, and the capacity to lead were not confined to one gender. By actively contributing to the physical and emotional survival of the group, women gradually reshaped societal expectations, and laid the groundwork for greater recognition of their rights and potentials in an expanding nation. Their perseverance under the strain of frontier life provided a powerful example of fortitude and independence that resonated through later generations. In conclusion, the contributions of women in the wagon trains were indispensable in the monumental effort of westward migration. Their involvement in physical labor, emotional support, and community building not only helped sustain the journeys of countless families, but also redefined gender roles in a rapidly changing society. These women, often working in the shadows of history, were the unsung architects of frontier life, whose legacy of resilience and adaptability remains a testament to the strength of the human spirit in the face of immense adversity. Settlement and the struggles for survival. Settlement on the frontier represented a new beginning for many pioneers, but it came with a series of formidable challenges that tested the strength and resilience of each individual. Establishing a new community on unknown land was both an act of hope and a struggle against relentless natural forces and limited resources. Early settlers faced a harsh environment where the seasons could change rapidly, turning fertile land into barren stretches and calm weather into violent storms without warning. The initial stage of settlement involved finding a location that offered some measure of safety, access to water, and potential for farming, yet the unpredictable nature of the land often rendered these efforts uncertain. From the moment the pioneers set up their makeshift homes, survival became an ongoing battle. They had to quickly develop techniques for building shelters that could withstand strong winds, heavy rains, and the severe cold of winter. Simple structures, often built from readily available wood and mud, provided temporary refuge, yet many were prone to damage from the elements. The initial rush to establish a settlement was also driven by a sense of urgency to secure food and water. Farmers attempted to cultivate the native soil, but the unfamiliar climate and unpredictable weather patterns often ruined their crops before harvest. The lack of reliable agricultural yield meant that communities had to depend on hunting, gathering, and bartering with neighboring groups to meet their basic needs. The daily life of settlers was dominated by the struggle to maintain a stable food supply. Efforts to farm had to be constantly adjusted to the local environment, and the unanticipated frosts or summer droughts frequently decimated carefully planted fields. When crops failed, starvation and malnutrition became real risks. Additionally, the need to prepare, preserve, and store food was more pressing than ever in areas where resources were scarce. The settlers learned quickly that survival depended not just on physical labor, but also on understanding the land and adapting old farming techniques to new and challenging conditions. Socially, the establishment of a settlement required more than the mere physical act of building structures. It demanded the creation of a support network to share knowledge, resources, and labor. Neighbors became partners in survival, pooling what little they had to build a common infrastructure, such as wells, communal ovens, and storage facilities. Every member of a community had a role, and the success of a settlement was measured by the ability of individuals to work together towards a shared goal. Yet, differences in opinion and the harsh realities of frontier life sometimes led to conflict among settlers, further complicating their struggle to thrive. Trust, negotiation, and compromise became as important as manual labor, especially when the future of the settlement hung in the balance. Moreover, health concerns loomed large in every new settlement. The combination of poor nutrition, arduous physical labor, and unsanitary living conditions contributed to frequent outbreaks of disease. Medical knowledge was limited, and remedies were often rudimentary, making every illness a potential disaster. In many cases, survival depended on the settlers' ability to improvise solutions to problems as they arose. Whether that meant repurposing materials for makeshift medical tools or finding novel ways to rid the area of pests and parasites. Despite these overwhelming challenges, the resolve of the early settlers never faltered. They persisted in rebuilding their lives and communities against all odds. driven by the promise of a future carved out of determination and shared sacrifice. Their struggles laid the foundation for the growing nation, a testament to the extraordinary lengths that people will go in their pursuit of a better life. Chapter 4: Life on the Frontier. Living on the frontier meant embracing a lifestyle defined by both unpredictability and resilience. Every day brought new challenges as settlers strived to build sustainable lives amid a raw and unbridled landscape. The rhythm of life on the frontier was dictated by nature rather than clock or calendar. Seasons were extreme, resources were often scarce, and adaptability was essential for survival. Families were thrust into a world where they had to learn rapidly how to harness the land's potential, turning isolated homesteads into thriving communities over time. The everyday reality of frontier life was built upon hard labor and the necessity of self-reliance. From the moment the sun rose, settlers engaged in arduous work, tending to crops, tending livestock, constructing shelters, and maintaining the tools that allowed them to live. The absence of modern conveniences meant that every task, from grinding grain to collecting water, had to be accomplished manually. This way of life demanded not just physical strength, but also ingenuity. Each challenge, whether repairing a leaky roof with available materials or devising new farming methods to counter unpredictable weather patterns, showcased the resourcefulness of those living on the edge of civilization. Community ties played a critical role in easing the difficulties of frontier living. Neighbors often pooled their resources, shared labor, and provided support during times of hardship. Social interaction was a rare luxury compared to the hustle of daily survival, yet these relationships were vital to the collective well-being. Shared experiences of isolation and struggle forged bonds among settlers. Community gatherings, despite being infrequent and informal, provided moments of respite and an opportunity to celebrate small victories. Such interactions reinforced the idea that progress was not a solitary journey, but a joint endeavor where the success of one household contributed to the strength of the entire community. Economic activities on the frontier were usually centered around agriculture and small-scale trade. Farmers cultivated what the land could yield, and artisans or tradespeople provided essential goods that were otherwise hard to come by. The local economy was characteristically barter-based in its infancy, with settlers exchanging produce, handcrafted tools, and services. This nascent marketplace, though limited in scope, laid the groundwork for more structured economic systems as the frontier gradually transformed into established towns. Despite the slow pace of development, the seeds of economic growth were being sown amid the rugged challenges of frontier existence. Cultural life on the frontier was equally shaped by necessity and aspiration. In the midst of relentless hardship, settlers found comfort in the familiar rituals and traditions of their homelands. Storytelling, music, and religious observances offered a reprieve from daily toil. These cultural practices helped maintain a sense of identity and continuity even as the physical surroundings underwent dramatic transformation. The fusion of various cultural influences, brought about by the movement of peoples from different regions, gradually contributed to the unique character of frontier society. Life on the frontier, though fraught with perpetual struggle, was also a testament to human determination and hope. The challenges faced by settlers were immense, yet their persistent efforts laid the foundation for a modern nation. Their legacy is etched not only in the physical structures they built, but also in the enduring spirit of adaptability and communal strength that continues to define the American ethos. Building homesteads and towns. Settling on the frontier required more than sheer determination. It demanded ingenuity, hard work, and a collective spirit that transformed barren landscapes into thriving communities. Early pioneers built homesteads by first confronting the challenges posed by rugged terrain and the unpredictable forces of nature. With limited tools and an acute awareness of the fragile balance with the environment, settlers began by constructing simple shelters that provided immediate protection from the elements. These initial structures, often hastily erected from locally available materials like logs and sod, formed the nucleus around which larger communities gradually evolved. The process was one of trial and error, as each homestead not only served as a personal refuge, but also as an experiment in sustainable living on unfamiliar soil. The transformation of isolated homesteads into organized towns did not happen overnight. As more families moved into an area, the need for shared infrastructure and communal spaces became evident. Settlers began carving out spaces for public gatherings, markets, and places of worship, reflecting the desire to recreate a semblance of the familiar social structures left behind in their previous lives. Roads and simple bridges were built to connect these growing clusters of homes, facilitating the movement of people, goods, and ideas. The creation of these networks was essential not only for the physical consolidation of the community, but also for fostering a shared sense of identity and belonging. Over time, these early efforts at community planning laid the groundwork for more organized municipal structures. Economic opportunities spurred the growth of towns around homesteads. Agricultural innovation led to more reliable yields, and as local farms became established, they also began to feed small markets and trade centers. The establishment of blacksmith shops, general stores, and bakeries provided settlers with a level of self-sufficiency that further encouraged town development. These businesses were not merely about economic transactions, they became social hubs where information was exchanged and community decisions were made. As trade routes extended and communication improved, the towns became interconnected with broader regional and national networks, integrating the isolated frontier into a larger economic system. The physical layout of these emerging towns was often a pragmatic response to both environmental constraints and the realities of frontier life. Instead of ornate city planning, settlers focused on functionality, ensuring that essential services such as water supply, communal meeting spaces, and defense were strategically located. The arrangement of homes, business centers, and civic buildings was designed to maximize both security and efficiency. Defensive structures, though rudimentary, were sometimes built to protect against potential conflicts with either wildlife or other groups, underscoring the constant awareness of vulnerability that pervaded daily life. In many ways, the evolution of homesteads into towns paralleled the broader narrative of American expansion, marked by both progress and struggle. Every building constructed, every road paved, and every market established symbolized the persistence of human endeavor in the face of adversity. The collective efforts of those first settlers have left a lasting imprint on the national character, a testament to the power of community and the enduring human spirit. Their legacy, visible in the quaint towns and burgeoning cities that dot modern landscapes, continues to remind us of the extraordinary journey from isolated homesteads to vibrant communities forged against all odds. The challenges of farming and ranching. Farming and ranching on the frontier were endeavors marked by unpredictability and hardship, demanding resilience from those who sought to harness the land for livelihood. The challenges faced by early farmers and ranchers were multifaceted and rooted in the realities of an environment that was both untamed and unforgiving. Every season brought with it a unique set of obstacles, and success in these pursuits required a deep understanding of natural cycles, as well as a constant readiness to adapt to sudden changes. The environmental conditions of the frontier posed severe challenges to agriculture. Farmers had to contend with erratic weather patterns that could swing from scorching heat to bitter cold in a single day. Extended droughts could parch the soil, leaving crops withering under the relentless sun, while unexpected frosts threatened to decimate burgeoning fields just as harvest neared. Flooding, too, was a constant risk, as heavy rains could transform once fertile fields into waterlogged quagmires. Without modern irrigation systems or weather forecasts, settlers relied on instinct, experience, and a bit of luck to manage their crops. The need for constant vigilance against these natural factors made farming a precarious enterprise, where every season could yield uncertain rewards. Ranching presented its own set of challenges that were as demanding as those faced in crop cultivation. Establishing and maintaining a herd in vast and remote areas required careful planning and significant labor. Livestock were vulnerable to a variety of hazards, including attacks by wild predators and diseases that spread rapidly among herds with little to no access to veterinary care. The open range, while offering ample room for grazing, also meant that cattle and other animals could easily wander into harsh terrains or become lost during extreme weather events. Ranchers often had to invest considerable time and energy into managing their herds, constantly monitoring the health and movement of their livestock, and devising innovative solutions to prevent losses. The economic pressures on both farmers and ranchers compounded these environmental challenges. The initial investment in land, seeds, livestock, and essential tools was significant, and returns were uncertain. Market fluctuations and the lack of established distribution networks could mean that even a successful harvest or robust herd might not translate into immediate profit. Settlers sometimes had to rely on barter or local trade, further complicating their efforts to secure a stable income. Additionally, isolation from urban centers made access to supplies and additional financial resources limited. This isolation increased the risks associated with any failure, as there were few options to recover quickly from a bad season or unexpected loss. Community support and innovative adaptations gradually emerged as critical survival mechanisms for those struggling with the rigors of frontier agriculture. Neighbors shared knowledge, exchanged practical tips, and sometimes pooled resources to construct makeshift systems for water management and crop preservation. Despite the significant challenges and frequent setbacks, the persistence and resourcefulness of these early settlers laid the foundation for the development of robust agricultural practices over time. Their experiences, fraught with both trial and determination, remain a testament to the courage and ingenuity required to tame an unpredictable land and transform it into a source of sustenance and prosperity. The role of law and order in the Wild West. The establishment and maintenance of law and order in the Wild West was an essential, yet challenging aspect of life on the frontier. In an environment where traditional institutions of governance were often absent, communities had to improvise systems of justice and security that could address the unique challenges of a rapidly expanding frontier. As settlers poured into vast, untamed landscapes, the lack of formal legal frameworks created a vacuum that was frequently filled by local militias, self-appointed sheriffs, and vigilante groups. These informal structures laid the groundwork for modern law enforcement in a region defined by its rugged individualism and a constant clash between freedom and chaos. In many frontier towns, the role of the law was both an instrument of order and a reflection of the community's desire to secure their newfound way of life. The absence of established courts meant that local leaders often took on the dual role of peacemaker and judge. This duality, while necessary in the short term, sometimes led to arbitrary decisions, as these informal judicial systems were heavily dependent on the temperament and personal biases of those in power. However, the alternative, an environment without any system of regulation, would have likely resulted in even more severe lawlessness. As a result, the initial, often haphazard, measures played a crucial role in curbing the worst excesses of frontier life. The challenges of establishing law and order were compounded by the diverse and often transient population of the West. Settlers, prospectors, Native American groups, and outlaws often converged on the same territories, bringing with them differing cultural norms and expectations of justice. In many cases, conflict was inevitable, and the response varied greatly from one town to the next. Some communities opted for strict measures, establishing curfews, local militias, and even impromptu courts to deal with disputes and criminal activities. Others relied on the deterrent effect of a visible, if rudimentary, law enforcement presence, which served to quiet tensions and discourage rampant criminality. The role of the law evolved over time as frontier communities matured and began to formalize their governance structures. As more settlers arrived and towns grew into cities, there was a gradual shift from informal, ad hoc justice systems to the establishment of codified laws and official courts. The increasing complexity of interactions among a more settled population necessitated more consistent and impartial systems of adjudication. It was during this transitional period that some of the enduring figures of Wild West lore, such as sheriffs and marshals, emerged. These individuals became symbols of order amid chaos, often embodying both the harsh realities of frontier justice and the hope for a more civilized society. Despite the progress made in establishing law and order, the legacy of the Wild West is inseparable from its episodes of unruly justice and vigilantism. The difficulties of imposing order on a vast, sparsely populated region meant that traditional legal concepts were frequently adapted to suit local conditions. In the end, while the quest for law and order in the Wild West was fraught with conflict and contradictions, it played a fundamental role in shaping a society defined by both its pioneering spirit and its enduring commitment to justice. The experiences of the frontier have left an indelible mark on the American consciousness, reminding us that the rule of law is not an innate feature of society, but rather a hard-won achievement. Chapter 5: The Native American Experience. The story of Native Americans in the face of westward expansion is one of resilience, resistance, and profound cultural change. As European settlers pushed westward, indigenous tribes who had flourished on these lands for millennia encountered an overwhelming force that threatened to erase centuries of tradition and coexistence with nature. Their experience was marked by both adaptation and profound disruption, as they found themselves forced to confront a new order imposed by colonization. For many Native American communities, the arrival of European settlers brought an abrupt end to their long-held ways of life. Traditional hunting grounds, sacred sites, and expansive territories that had sustained various tribes were gradually encroached upon by settlers seeking to claim and cultivate the land. This encroachment led to an inevitable clash of cultures, where the indigenous people were forced to adapt to a rapidly changing environment while attempting to hold on to their historical roots. Forced to navigate a delicate balance between preserving their unique cultural practices and adapting to new economic and political realities, many tribes endeavored to maintain their heritage against considerable odds. The imposition of European laws, religion, and economic structures disrupted indigenous social and political organization. Missionary efforts introduced Christianity, often in direct conflict with traditional spiritual beliefs and practices that had guided Native American life for generations. As a result, several Native communities faced a crisis of identity, caught between the allure of a new way of life offered by settlers and the allure of preserving the customs that had defined them. In addition, new diseases brought by Europeans decimated populations that had no natural immunity, accelerating cultural and demographic declines that reverberated through generations. Despite these immense challenges, Native Americans demonstrated extraordinary resilience. In many cases, they employed a combination of negotiation, resistance, and adaptation to survive in an increasingly hostile environment. Some tribes managed to secure treaties, albeit often unfavorable ones, which provided temporary reprieves in their struggle for autonomy. Others took up arms or joined coalitions in a determined bid to resist displacement and preserve their lands. While the consequences of these confrontations were devastating, they also underscored the ability of indigenous peoples to assert their rights and safeguard elements of their identity even under the most oppressive circumstances. Over time, many Native American communities began to integrate aspects of European technology and trade into their lives. Yet, this integration was a double-edged sword that sometimes came at the cost of traditional practices. As adapting to a new economic system, some indigenous groups embraced new agricultural methods and trading opportunities, transforming their ways of life in profound ways. However, this shift also often led to the erosion of time-honored cultural practices as the pressure to conform to a rapidly modernizing society intensified. The legacy of Native American experiences during the era of westward expansion is one of both loss and endurance. Their struggles and the enduring impact of colonization continue to influence contemporary debates around land rights, cultural preservation, and national identity. The historical narrative of indigenous peoples is a complex tapestry interwoven with sorrow, courage, and the persistent quest for self-determination. A testament to the strength of communities that have weathered immense adversity while continually striving to uphold their traditions and heritage. Displacement and forced relocations. The era of westward expansion in America was marked by significant upheavals, none more devastating than the widespread displacement and forced relocations of Native American communities. As settlers and the U.S. government pursued the promise of manifest destiny, indigenous lands were systematically seized and reallocated to pave the way for new settlements, mining ventures, and agricultural expansion. This period of forced relocation not only stripped Native Americans of their ancestral territories, but also attempted to erase centuries of cultural heritage that had been intricately bound to the land. The processes of displacement were often abrupt and brutal. Native communities who had lived in a delicate balance with nature for generations suddenly found themselves pushed off land that was vital for their survival, spiritual practices, and social structures. Government policies, such as the Indian Removal Act, were implemented with little regard for the deep connections indigenous peoples had with their homelands. In many cases, entire tribes were compelled to abandon fertile valleys, sacred sites, and hunting grounds in favor of designated reservation lands that were frequently remote, harsh, and unsuitable for sustaining traditional ways of life. The loss of familiar landscapes was not merely a physical displacement, but also a profound emotional and cultural dislocation, as the land held the memories, rituals, and identity of each community. Forced relocations were executed under conditions that were both logistically challenging and inherently inhumane. Groups of Native Americans were often assembled with minimal notice and provided with inadequate resources for the long journeys ahead. Treks spanned vast distances under perilous conditions, exposing vulnerable populations to extreme weather, disease, and the constant threat of violence. The psychological toll of such forced migrations was immense, leading to widespread grief, as families were separated and entire communities were uprooted from their traditional social networks. The scars left by these relocations are deep and long-lasting, with many tribes still feeling the effects of disrupted social continuity and the loss of intergenerational knowledge that was once passed down through close-knit community living. In addition to the immediate hardships of the journey, the aftermath of relocation presented ongoing challenges for Native Americans. Once resettled on reservations, many groups encountered an environment that was both alien and unsustainable. The new territories often lacked the natural resources essential for traditional hunting, farming, and cultural practices. Economic deprivation became widespread as indigenous peoples struggled to adapt to life under a system that prioritized assimilation into a Euro-American model of civilization. The forced adjustments to new forms of governance, economic activity, and social organization further contributed to a sense of dislocation and alienation. Despite these overwhelming challenges, Native American communities demonstrated remarkable resilience. Cultural survival took on new forms as traditional practices were adapted to the harsh realities of reservation life. Stories of endurance, resistance, and the preservation of identity continued to be passed down through generations, even as the pains of displacement became etched into the collective memory. The legacy of forced relocations remains a potent reminder of the price paid during the nation's expansion, highlighting the enduring struggle of indigenous communities to reclaim and revitalize their cultural heritage in the face of historic injustices. Native resistance and conflicts. Throughout the history of westward expansion, Native American communities consistently demonstrated resilience by actively resisting the encroachments of settlers and the U.S. government. The growing pressures to cede land, abandon traditional ways of life, and submit to foreign laws often sparked a range of responses from armed confrontations to diplomatic negotiations. This resistance was not a monolithic movement, but rather a series of diverse and localized efforts, each rooted in the unique cultural, environmental, and political circumstances of the tribes involved. In many regions, indigenous groups were confronted by sudden invasions that threatened their entire way of life. As settlers pushed into territories that had been home for centuries, Native Americans organized to defend their lands. In some cases, small-scale skirmishes erupted as local warriors challenged encroaching forces, employing traditional tactics and knowledge of the terrain. These confrontations were fueled by a deep-seated desire to maintain sovereignty, rooted in a connection to the land that transcended modern notions of property and territorial rights. For many tribes, resistance was less about acquiring territory and more about preserving identity, culture, and spiritual heritage. While some groups chose direct confrontation, others pursued resistance through more diplomatic means. Tribal leaders often engaged in negotiations with government officials, seeking to secure treaties that would at least offer temporary relief from the relentless pressure of expansion. Such treaties were frequently marred by misunderstandings, broken promises, or outright manipulation by colonial powers. Nonetheless, these efforts highlighted an important aspect of resistance: the willingness of Native American leaders to negotiate terms that might preserve elements of their autonomy and way of life, even under duress. Diplomacy, though fraught with challenges, allowed some tribes to safeguard resources and secure limited self-governance for a time. At the same time, resistance took on cultural and spiritual dimensions that were as significant as any armed conflict. The encroachment on sacred lands and the disruption of ancestral traditions prompted an assertive cultural revival among various tribes. Ceremonies, oral histories, and traditional practices became acts of defiance, serving to reinforce community bonds in the face of external pressures. These practices helped preserve the essence of indigenous life, offering both a means to resist cultural assimilation and a method for transmitting history and values to future generations. Conflicts were not confined to isolated regions. They extended into broader struggles for national policy as well. The resistance mounted by Native American coalitions often influenced public debates in the emerging nation. Public outcry over the treatment of indigenous peoples sometimes forced a reevaluation of government policies, leading to intermittent reforms that, however limited, acknowledged the legitimacy of Native American claims. Despite these rare successes, many Native communities continued to suffer the consequences of relentless expansion, with violence and dispossession leaving lasting scars on the social fabric of entire regions. The legacy of Native resistance and conflicts is complex and enduring. These struggles not only reflect the determination of indigenous peoples to defend their homeland, but also serve as reminders of the deep injustices inflicted during the nation's formative years. Their actions, ranging from armed resistance to steadfast cultural preservation, have shaped the ongoing dialogue about land rights, sovereignty, and historical memory in modern society. Ultimately, the experiences of Native resistance highlight a critical chapter in American history, characterized by courage, tenacity, and an unwavering commitment to the preservation of a way of life that had withstood centuries of transformation. The impact of the frontier on Native cultures. The frontier, as a theater of relentless expansion and upheaval, left an indelible mark on Native cultures throughout America. The incursion of settlers into territories long held sacred by indigenous peoples initiated a process of cultural transformation that has resonated through subsequent generations. As the frontier pushed westward, Native communities experienced significant disruptions that threatened the continuity of their traditions, languages, and social structures. The arrival of outsiders not only brought new economic activities and technologies, but also introduced a range of cultural dynamics that altered indigenous ways of life. Native cultures were deeply connected to their lands, with every element of nature holding symbolic meaning and serving vital roles in spiritual practices. When settlers claimed these territories, it disrupted the balance that Native Americans had maintained over centuries. Sacred sites were desecrated or destroyed as new settlements emerged, and age-old practices tied to the rhythms of the natural world were increasingly sidelined. With the loss of traditional lands, many indigenous peoples found it difficult to maintain the rituals, ceremonies, and storytelling traditions that were intrinsic to their identity. The erosion of these cultural practices was compounded by the imposition of foreign laws and the spread of new religions, which often conflicted with indigenous worldviews and further weakened the social cohesion of Native communities. The cultural impact extended beyond the physical loss of territory. With the influx of European goods, technology, and ideologies, Native Americans were exposed to a radically different way of life. Trading relationships introduced items that promised convenience and modernity, yet these exchanges often came at the cost of traditional craftsmanship and indigenous self-sufficiency. As markets developed and new economic relationships took hold, dependency on non-native goods grew, subtly altering the indigenous economic systems that had operated in harmony with nature for generations. The lure of these novel products and practices sometimes led younger generations to adopt practices that diverged sharply from ancestral customs, creating a generational gap in cultural knowledge and values. At the same time, the pressure of maintaining cultural integrity in the face of overwhelming change gave rise to acts of preservation and revitalization. Many Native communities found creative ways to resist assimilation by strengthening cultural practices and reviving traditional languages, art forms, and ceremonies. Cultural revitalization efforts, spearheaded by community elders and leaders, became crucial in asserting Native identity in an environment that was rapidly redefining itself along Euro-American lines. Despite the challenges posed by forced relocations, disease, and the persistent drive of colonial expansion, indigenous peoples demonstrated remarkable resilience by holding on to the core aspects of their heritage. In this way, the impact of the frontier on Native cultures presents a dual narrative of both profound loss and enduring strength. While the external forces associated with westward expansion led to displacement, cultural erosion, and economic challenges, these same experiences also mobilized a determination to preserve indigenous identity. The ongoing struggle to reclaim and adapt traditional practices in the contemporary world is a testament to the resilience of Native cultures. Today, efforts to revive language programs, cultural ceremonies, and traditional crafts serve as living proof that while the frontier reshaped indigenous life, it did not eradicate the spirit and enduring legacy of Native American cultures. Chapter 6: The Gold Rush and Economic Boom. The Gold Rush marked one of the most dynamic periods in American history and set the stage for an economic boom that reshaped the nation. In the mid-19th century, news of gold discoveries in California sent shockwaves of excitement across the country, sparking a mass migration of prospectors, entrepreneurs, and hopeful settlers. People from all walks of life set out on arduous journeys toward the golden promise, lured by the possibility of sudden wealth and an opportunity to reinvent themselves away from the constraints of established society. As thousands of fortune seekers converged on California, the gold rush acted as a catalyst for rapid economic development. Mining camps soon transformed into bustling settlements, and simple tent communities gave way to more permanent structures as wealth trickled in. The discovery of gold encouraged considerable investment in infrastructure, with roads, bridges, and later, railroads quickly emerging to serve the ever-growing population. With the influx of people came a surge in trade and commerce. Entrepreneurs established supply stores, saloons, and hotels, turning isolated mining hubs into vibrant centers of economic activity. The flow of capital was so intense that even established cities felt the ripple effects, as newfound wealth created demand for goods and services that extended well beyond the mining sector. The rapid expansion driven by the gold rush significantly impacted multiple facets of American society. Traditional economic models were upended as individuals abandoned conventional farming and business pursuits in search of uncharted opportunities. This shift resulted in a complex interaction between industrial development and agricultural production. On one hand, mining operations generated vast fortunes that enabled investments in technology and industry. On the other hand, the sudden focus on extractive activities sometimes diverted attention from the more sustainable practices of local communities. Government and private enterprises both sought to capitalize on the rapid growth by establishing banks and new financial institutions to manage the booming trade in precious metals and related industries. The economic boom also brought significant social changes that left their mark on the American consciousness. The gold rush fostered a unique blend of cultures as people from various backgrounds, including immigrants from Europe, Latin America, and Asia, joined the quest for prosperity. This melting pot of populations led to both collaboration and conflict, as differing values and traditions collided amid the pressure of rapid change. Although the period was characterized by optimism and a sense of adventure, it also revealed the harsher realities of exploitation, inequality, and environmental degradation. The gold rush towns often grappled with issues of lawlessness and disorder, which prompted the early emergence of some form of regulation and community organization. In essence, the gold rush and the economic boom that followed transformed the landscape of the American West and redefined the economic trajectory of the nation. It demonstrated the extraordinary potential for rapid economic growth, underpinned by the lure of natural resources, while also highlighting the challenges that accompany such explosive development. The legacy of this era endures in the lasting impact on American industry, transportation, and cultural diversity. As a turning point in the nation's history, the gold rush continues to symbolize both the promise and the peril of transforming a fledgling society into an industrial power through the compelling force of unbridled ambition. The discovery of gold and its consequences. The discovery of gold in the American West was a transformative event that set off a chain reaction of economic, social, and political changes. In the early decades of the 19th century, when whispers of hidden riches began to circulate, they stirred ambitions far and wide. Prospectors, encouraged by the promise of instant fortune and the lure of a new start, converged on regions like California in droves. The ensuing frenzy not only redefined the economic landscape, but also reshaped the very fabric of communities along the frontier. The initial reports of glittering veins of gold sparked an unprecedented surge of migration. Thousands of hopefuls from distant cities and even other countries left behind established lives in search of an elusive opportunity. The race to find and extract the precious metal was marked by incredible courage and, at times, reckless abandon. Makeshift camps quickly evolved into bustling mining towns that erupted overnight, giving birth to a unique society defined by rapid growth, extreme competition, and a palpable tension between order and chaos. The speed at which these mining towns sprang up was staggering, and the new settlements became hotbeds for entrepreneurial ventures, albeit ones driven by the immediate desire for wealth. Economic consequences were profound and far-reaching. The influx of capital from gold discoveries not only stimulated local trade, but also provided the raw materials necessary for the Industrial Revolution. Banking institutions saw an opportunity in the gold rush, and an increased need for secure channels of financial transaction emerged. As miners and merchants exchanged goods and services, markets began to flourish. However, this sudden prosperity came with drawbacks. The rapid concentration of wealth in mining camps led to stark disparities, and the growing wealth gap often resulted in social unrest. Wealth was unevenly distributed, and the speculative nature of mining investments created an environment ripe for deception, exploitation, and occasional fraud. The environmental impact of gold mining was significant as well. As prospectors advanced into pristine regions, the landscape was reshaped by excavations, river diversions, and the extraction methods employed in the frantic search for gold. This environmental degradation had a lasting effect on local ecosystems, altering waterways, diminishing soil fertility, and leading to long-term ecological challenges that communities would grapple with for decades. The quest for gold was pursued with little regard for sustainable practices, and the consequences of such recklessness continue to be felt in areas where mining once occurred. Socially, the discovery of gold brought a melting pot of cultures together in a cauldron of rapidly evolving traditions. People from various backgrounds, including immigrants from Asia, Europe, and Latin America, converged on the same remote regions, enriching local cultures while also igniting tensions. Laws and social order were tested as communities struggled to maintain stability amid the rapid changes imposed by the sudden wealth and mass migration. As communities eventually attempted to stabilize and formalize governance, the legacy of the gold rush became a profound reminder of both the promise and pitfalls of sudden economic opportunity. Ultimately, the discovery of gold and its subsequent consequences left an indelible mark on the nation's history. While it catalyzed a period of significant growth and innovation, the era was equally defined by stark inequalities, environmental degradation, and enduring social challenges that continue to shape American history. The growth of boomtowns. The phenomenon of boomtowns emerged as an inevitable outcome of rapid economic and population growth in areas transformed by natural resource discoveries. As prospectors and settlers flooded into regions promising vast fortunes, the resulting surge in demand for housing, goods, and services brought about the swift development of these transient urban centers. Initially, boomtowns were little more than tent cities, rapidly evolving to accommodate thousands of individuals seeking their share of newfound wealth. The pace of growth was astonishing as infrastructure sprang up almost overnight, reflecting both the immense potential of the area and the desperation to reap the benefits of a resource-rich environment. As more people arrived, what began as a collection of makeshift shelters quickly transformed into structured communities with paved streets, commercial districts, and public facilities. The rapid influx of population necessitated the establishment of permanent buildings to house residents, businesses, and government institutions. At this stage, local entrepreneurs played a central role, investing in the construction of hotels, saloons, stores, and entertainment venues. In addition, services such as banking, medical care, and law enforcement emerged to support the growing community, further embedding boomtowns into the broader economic framework of the nation. The transformation was not merely physical, but also social. As communities shifted from temporary camps into more organized settlements with a distinct sense of identity, albeit one built on volatile foundations. The growth of boomtowns was both a symbol of progress and a mirror reflecting the impermanence of certain frontier endeavors. While these towns often flourished when resource extraction was at its peak, their rapid expansion was typically followed by a precipitous decline when resources were exhausted or when the rush of migration slowed down. In many cases, the collapse of a boomtown would leave behind ghost towns, silent remnants of an era defined by frenzied ambition and fleeting prosperity. Despite this cyclical pattern of boom and bust, the legacy of these towns persists in American history as vital chapters in the story of rapid development and innovation driven by natural resource exploits. Economic factors were the primary drivers behind the remarkable expansion of boomtowns as local economies experienced transformative shifts. The influx of investment and labor not only stimulated local trade, but also attracted interest from national and even international investors. Technological advancements, particularly in mining and transportation, further accelerated development and, in some instances, led to innovations that spread to other regions. However, with such rapid growth came challenges. Social services and infrastructure often lagged behind the pace of expansion, leading to issues such as overcrowding, inadequate sanitation, and strained public resources. The swift development demanded that local governments and community leaders innovate on the fly to meet the needs of an ever-growing population, highlighting both the promise and pitfalls of rapid urbanization in a frontier environment. In summary, the growth of boomtowns encapsulates a period of American history marked by explosive change and economic dynamism. What began as temporary settlements evolved into bustling communities driven by the unyielding quest for wealth and opportunity. Although many boomtowns eventually succumbed to economic downturns, their brief periods of intense development left lasting impressions on the nation's landscape. The rise and fall of these towns serve as a testament to the challenges of rapid growth and the enduring impact of resource-driven expansion on the American frontier. The mining industry and its legacy. The mining industry played a central role in the shaping of the American West, serving as a powerful engine for economic growth while also leaving behind a multifaceted legacy that continues to influence the region and the nation. Beginning with the fervor of the gold rush and other mineral booms, mining attracted waves of prospectors and investors, all drawn by the promise of wealth and opportunity. In the early years, mining was a rudimentary and often dangerous enterprise, characterized by makeshift camps, hand-dug tunnels, and a sense of wild adventure that captured the national imagination. The industry's rapid expansion not only drove population shifts as people flocked to resource-rich areas, but it also spurred the development of infrastructure and local commerce. As mining operations evolved from individual claims to larger, more organized endeavors, significant changes followed. The mechanization of mining processes and the introduction of innovative techniques allowed for larger-scale extraction of minerals, reshaping both the economic landscape and the physical environment. Large companies emerged, consolidating claims and investing in modern equipment to increase production. This industrialization fueled the growth of nearby towns and cities, laying down the roots for lasting urban and regional development. At the same time, the prosperity associated with mining attracted diverse groups from various backgrounds, further adding to the cultural mosaic of the frontier. While the mining industry provided substantial economic benefits and catalyzed technological innovations, it also came with a host of environmental and social consequences that reverberate to this day. The intensive extraction of minerals led to significant alteration of landscapes, with mining pits, tailings, and the deforestation of large areas becoming common sights in many mining regions. The environmental degradation associated with mining practices disrupted local ecosystems and caused long-term soil and water contamination, issues that have required considerable remediation efforts in modern times. In addition, the boom and bust nature of mining communities left many towns abandoned once the resources were depleted, creating ghost towns that stand as poignant reminders of a bygone era. The social impact of mining was equally profound. The discovery of precious minerals and the subsequent rush brought together people from different parts of the world, contributing to the cultural richness and diversity that characterizes the American West. However, the competitive drive to strike it rich also bred tension, conflict, and inequality, as wealth was often unevenly distributed among those involved in the industry. Not every miner found fortune. Many faced hardship and destitution as the initial promise of wealth gave way to a more complex reality where exploitation and dangerous working conditions were common. Labor disputes and challenges over fair working conditions later spurred the development of early labor reforms and unions, elements that contributed to the broader narrative of workers' rights in America. In retrospect, the mining industry is remembered both for its impressive contributions to economic development and for the challenges it posed to society and the environment. Its legacy is a mixed one, marked by innovation, cultural exchange, economic boom, and environmental transformation. The enduring impact of mining continues to shape policy debates, conservation efforts, and historical narratives, serving as a testament to the enduring power of natural resources in shaping human destiny and the complex interplay between progress and preservation. You have been listening to The American Frontier: Pioneers, Settlers, and the Wild West, written by Harry Montgomery, narrated by Cedar Rays.